Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Today's episode is going to be titled, Most Things Are Your Own Fault. In recent weeks, I've found myself reflecting on a recurring trend, one that's deeply ingrained in the digital and social fabric of our time. People frequently express dissatisfaction with their lives, particularly their work environments. And while this isn't a newly emergent phenomenon, a recent example brought the issue into sharper focus. I came across a post from someone complaining about their job. They were frustrated by their wages, the limited hours they were given, and the overall working conditions. It wasn't unique. Similar sentiments are echoed across comment sections and real-life conversations alike. What struck me most wasn't the complaint itself, but the underlying belief that someone else bore full responsibility for their continued unhappiness. When individuals stay in jobs that they openly resent, knowing their pay is insufficient or the environment is toxic, the line between circumstance and personal choice begins to blur. The harsh reality is that, barring specific limitations, people have agency. They have the ability to walk away, to look elsewhere, or at the very least, to formulate a plan for change. Yet many instead choose to direct their energy toward criticizing employers, venting about their lack of fairness, or failing to provide raises and benefits. But rarely do these efforts result in meaningful change. If confronting management through complaints alone was truly transformative, the landscape would have evolved long ago. History proves otherwise. Systems change through leverage, negotiation, demonstrated value, or mass organization, not passive discontent. When someone chooses to remain in unfavorable conditions without pursuing alternatives, what follows is a form of acceptance. And while it's true that socioeconomic factors limit options for some, especially in marginalized communities or periods of economic hardship, a majority of workplace frustrations stem from choices people make willingly. Accepting poor treatment and compensation becomes a silent endorsement of that system. The inclination to blame outwardly stems from a larger cultural paradigm, one where accountability is often substituted with self-pity or external accusations. It's easier to feel wronged than to admit complicity in one's own dissatisfaction. But progress doesn't begin with blame. It begins with ownership. Without acknowledging our role in our circumstances, growth remains stunted. This principle extends beyond employment. Take, for instance, the issue of student debt. Every year, thousands enter academic institutions, securing substantial loans they know may take decades to repay. While education is a noble pursuit, the financial burden it carries is not one that arrives unexpectedly. It's well documented, openly discussed, and clearly understood. Despite this, many still see themselves as victims of the system rather than participants in it. The belief that education somehow justifies reckless financial choices doesn't hold up. A loan is a loan, whether it's for college, a luxury vacation, or an expensive car. Responsibility isn't altered by intention. If someone racks up $150,000 in college debt, knowing they lack the resources to repay it, that decision carries consequences. Yet pointing this out often provokes backlash. The messenger becomes the villain, accused of lacking empathy or being overly critical. There's an old saying attributed to ancient wisdom, perhaps from a Greek philosopher, that suggests, "No one is more hated than he who speaks the truth." And there's a reason this rings true. Truth challenges comfort. It disrupts the victim narrative. Accountability in our culture is increasingly misunderstood. It's seen not as empowerment, but as cruelty. When someone is told they are responsible for their choices, whether financial, emotional, or behavioral, it's often interpreted as judgment, even when it's meant to inspire change. A particularly sensitive example of this arises in discussions around personal safety and decision-making. There's a contentious debate surrounding the idea of risk management and accountability, especially when it involves individuals, often women, placing themselves in vulnerable environments. When tragedies occur, the immediate response is rightly focused on the wrongdoing of the perpetrator. Their actions are unequivocally condemned. But acknowledging that someone made a risky choice, like excessive drinking in unfamiliar company, is not the same as excusing assault or placing blame where it doesn't belong. There's a distinction between saying, "You deserve this," and "You made a decision that increased your risk." The former is cruel. The latter is a reality rooted in preventive awareness. We do ourselves a disservice when we remove the concept of personal responsibility from conversations about personal safety. Unfortunately, in our current climate, any critique of decisions that precede unfortunate outcomes is quickly labeled as victim blaming. This erases the nuance of accountability and creates a dangerous precedent that no decision can be questioned once consequences appear. But accountability isn't antagonism. It's an invitation to learn, improve, and avoid future harm. This erosion of personal responsibility isn't confined to the abstract. It's something I've confronted in my own life. As someone who has struggled with weight, I could easily blame external factors: genetics, upbringing, societal norms. I could point fingers at my parents' food choices, cultural influences, or emotional stress. But none of those elements physically placed food into my body. I did that. I made those choices. Owning that truth wasn't easy. It didn't arrive overnight. But it gave me power. Power to change, to set new habits, to become more intentional with what I consume, not just in food, but in thought. The moment I stopped blaming others for my outcomes was the moment I began reshaping them. We live in a society that rewards grievance more than resilience. Expressions of hardship often receive more attention than stories of triumph. Victimhood becomes a currency of empathy, and while it's vital to support those genuinely hurt or disadvantaged, it's just as important to remind each other of our capacity to choose differently. The message here is not one of cruelty, but of clarity. Life is full of uncontrollable events: illness, tragedy, systemic injustice. But amid those uncontrollables, we must not abandon what is within our grasp. We must distinguish between what happens to us and what results from us. It may be uncomfortable to say, but most of our life circumstances stem from the choices we've made. Exceptions exist, undoubtedly. But exceptions don't erase the rule, and pretending they do only keeps us stuck. We must reclaim the ability to reflect honestly, hold ourselves accountable, and make better decisions moving forward. Personal responsibility is not a punishment. It is a pathway to power. Without it, we remain at the mercy of circumstance. With it, we regain control, not just of outcomes, but of identity itself. So when I hear people complaining about their jobs, their finances, their relationships, or their health, I pause. Not because I lack empathy, but because I've learned to ask, what part of this did you choose? And if the answer is even a fraction of the whole, then that's where change begins. We can either lean into excuses or rise with intention. But we cannot do both. The choice, ultimately, is ours. Anyways, thank you for listening to this episode of the Moors October Rants. Signing out, have a good one, guys. Goodbye for now.